Welcome to week number 10. We are reaching double digits. I mean, that's pretty exciting. And if you weren't here last week, we talked about these so-called races. Why are there distinct people groups all around the world? And as we've been doing this entire time, when you start with the Bible, when you build your thinking on the Word of God, you have answers. So we looked at the Bible, and the Bible tells us we all come from one race, Adam's race. We all come from Adam and Eve. We're a human race, Adam's race, that's it. And we see distinct people groups all around the world, distinct characteristics. Regardless of the Tower of Babel, natural selection, isolated populations, you get different people groups, different distinct characteristics, what we see. And a common question after that, which is one of the reasons I put these presentations in this order, is that if that's the case, if we all come from Adam and Eve, then what about all these cavemen we see plastered on every form of media all around the world, whether textbooks, TV shows, commercials, whatever, that scientists present as absolute fact that man evolved from ape-like creatures. Where do they get the information from? Where do these pictures come from? What are the actual fossils? That's the stuff we're looking at tonight. And within this particular talk, the overarching theme for the next 3 weeks is going to be this: public education, indoctrination. And you need to understand that as we look at the evidence, we're going to look at a lot of other evidences presented in textbooks that suggest that evolution is true, that the earth is billions of years old. We've talked about some of these already. But basically, if they're right, then the Bible's history is wrong. If you can't trust the history, how do you trust the message of salvation that is based in that history? And as we look at this history, as we look at how man came to be, we've got to remember, as we've said many times, that all of the evidence exists here in the present. And when you're trying to figure out what happened in the past, you have to interpret what you see today. And you've got to interpret that with a worldview. You have to. And there are some people out there who believe that secular humanism, that worldview, is truth. And that is what is needed in our world today to fix the world, that humans are the answer. Not some mythical God, but humans, the idea of secular humanism. And so what I believe we see in public education is kind of this undercurrent that comes from kind of the top down, your higher levels of learning. This undercurrent of secular humanism that remains pretty much unseen by most people. Most kids don't see it, most parents don't see it, and I think a lot of teachers in the public education system don't even see it, but it is there. This undercurrent of secular humanism trying to pull people away from the Christian worldview. And if we do not prepare our kids to give an answer for the hope that they have, to give them the ability to deal with this undercurrent that's pulling them away from their faith, they will be swept away like so many others have been. And to kind of introduce this idea, I'm going to show you a clip from this movie called Indoctrination. I'll let the clip speak for itself, and then we'll talk about it.
I want to see a child in every public school in America who is trained as a witness for Jesus Christ.
When you send that child off to school today, you're sending them into a pagan society.
And the studies are showing that there's virtually no discernible difference between the church and the world. At what point is Southern Baptists going to rise up and say, enough is enough?
Whatever we once were, we are no longer a Christian nation.
We've got to do something different. The schools are failing.
And I would go to 6 or 7 days a week, not just Monday through Friday.
You're not going to be painting, okay? You're going to be writing down whatever comes to your mind when you hear the word gay or when you hear the word lesbian.
So nothing's right or wrong in this
right
either?
That's right.
They are stealing our children. But because they are leaving the body of the child with us, we don't even know what's happening.
If I had my way, government education would be brought to a halt.
Trying to fix public education is like trying to teach a pig how to dance. You get dirty and the pig gets mad.
Turning your children over to total strangers and having those strangers work on your child's mind, it's a mad idea.
Public schools have become a criminal enterprise.
Parents are willing to admit that there are these problems and yet believe that their children will somehow escape. They won't.
And it may have taken a school shooting to wake us up, to see the danger, but that's a very small danger compared to all the other things that go on that can destroy our children.
A teacher is in trouble for bringing a religion into his classroom, but should he lose his job?
When we go into a public school, we have to leave God at the door. It just came to the point where I couldn't do that anymore.
Jesus said, build your house upon the rock. But the foolish man refused the words of Christ, would not build their education systems on the fear of God, on the words of Christ.
Everything exists to proclaim the glory of God. And the one place where we send our kids 7 hours a day is a place where God's name can't be mentioned. It's not indoctrination, it's insanity.
It's pretty powerful, right? And I want to say something right here before we jump into this. I'm definitely not trying to impress upon you that all public schools are bad, that all teachers are bad. Remember, I myself am a public school teacher, and so is my wife. And there are a lot of other good, godly people in the school system who look at it as a mission field. And we go in there day in and day out, loving kids, trying to show the love of Christ through our job with the limits we are set with. But I think it cannot be denied that there is this, within public education in a whole, especially within the curriculum that is passed down from the higher institutions of learning, there is this drive, this push to replace the foundation of the Christian worldview, what America was founded on, with a new worldview of secular humanism. It's there. And it's indirect. You're not going to open up a textbook, a history book, and it's going to tell you Christianity is false, nor was the nation founded on it. That's all wrong. They didn't really believe in any God. You won't really see that. What you'll see is just in history books, the removal of the idea of God or Christianity within the foundation of our nation, just kind of left out. If you haven't taken the American Heritage class by David Barton, fantastic series. I really encourage you to check that out. It's really, really good. Well worth your time. And when you open up a science book, it's not probably going to tell you, hey, Christianity is wrong, creation is wrong, you shouldn't believe it, turn away from God. It's going to say stuff like, the universe is 15 billion years old and started with a Big Bang. The universe is 4.5 billion years old. Dinosaurs lived with man. Man evolved from apes. But the logical conclusion of those things is that if it's right, if the textbook is right, then the Bible's history is wrong. If we cannot trust the history of the Bible, how do you trust its message of salvation? It's an indirect attack, but those can be very effective. Indirect words can be effective. It reminds me of a story of two brothers who went to go spend the night with their grandma about a month before Christmas. And they got there, they spent the day, had supper or whatnot, and they were going to bed that night. And Grandma takes them up to the bedroom, says, all right, guys, say your prayers before you go to sleep. And they say, okay, Grandma. So Grandma shuts the door. And they both kneel by the bed. And then the younger brother starts to pray. Dear God, thank you for my awesome grandma. I just love being with her. She's so incredible. And dear God, I really want a bicycle for Christmas. Really, really want a bicycle. But if I can't get that, would you please give me an Xbox? Dear God, that would be great. And the older brother looks at the younger, it's like, man, why are you yelling? God is not hard of hearing. He said, yeah, but Grandma is. I like that kid. He's kind of clever. So indirect attacks can be effective, and that is really what's taking place, this undercurrent of secular humanism wiping away this foundation of Christianity in our nations. We need to be aware of that. And speaking of that, let's talk about these so-called cavemen. Were there cavemen? And it really kind of depends on what you mean by cavemen. This used to be the world's most wanted caveman. And he was the one before him. Or maybe by cavemen you mean, the Geico guy. So easy a caveman can do it, right? If you mean by living in a cave, there are cavemen today. People live in caves today. People lived in caves throughout all history. It doesn't make them any less human. Most of the time when we hear the word caveman, we're really thinking of something like this. What about these Ape-Men, these cavemen? We see pictures of them everywhere. They're presented as absolute fact in our textbooks, in our schools, especially in the college setting, but even in the high school and middle school settings, it's presented as absolute fact. You should read some of the textbooks that we have. It's pretty amazing and make you upset. And I want to clear up something right away that a lot of people ask me. They bring this to my attention. They say, okay, well, if evolution teaches that we evolved from apes, then why don't we see Ape-Men today? And since we don't see Ape-Men today, doesn't that disprove the theory of evolution? I hear that a lot. And it's a logical idea in and of itself, but it actually doesn't work because that's not necessarily what the theory teaches. And why don't we see ape women? Forgot about her. It's kind of scary. Reminds me of somebody I know, though. But anyway, no names. No, the theory of evolution basically says this, that us and the apes today, we all have a common ancestor in the past. And from that ancestor branched off many different primates that went in many different directions. And so essentially evolution teaches that apes, chimps, gorillas, orangutans, and humans all evolved at the same time. We didn't come from chimps. We evolved at the same time as chimps from a common ancestor way back in the day. So that's why we don't see ape men today. That's why chimps aren't still evolving, because they evolved along a different branch. That's the idea. But this does pose something of a problem for the evolutionists, because since these guys evolved with us, they cannot be used as evidence for evolution, nor can you use their fossils in the fossil record as evidence. So the only evidence you can hope to find to confirm the idea of human evolution will be ape men, and half man, half ape type hominid, a fossil. We'll talk more about that here in a second. But of course, the Bible says that no, God created us in his image. We came from Adam and Eve, and that the world was perfect, but then because of sin and death, things are getting worse over time. That's what the Bible teaches, and that's what we see. Second law of thermodynamics confirms that. But evolution says, oh no, we started off as an amoeba, eventually into an ape, and we're evolving onwards and upwards, getting better. And this is propagated as absolute truth throughout our culture. Our textbooks tell us, biology book, you are an animal and share a common heritage with earthworms. And I want you to notice how it's phrased. There's no question involved. It's not maybe, it's you are. If we tell students long enough they're an animal, it's really no wonder that a lot of them act like animals, all right? That's kind of the idea. You continue on another biology textbook. Monkeys, apes, and humans are examples of primates. Primates most likely evolved from small insect-eating rodent-like mammals. And what is this exotic rodent-like animal we evolved from? Well, there she is, the mother of all mammals. And I can't help but notice she looks like a rat. But there she is. We evolved from that about 200 million years ago, according to the idea. We're all descendants of a rat. I guess that gives new meaning to the phrase rat race. But anyway, I know that was bad. I couldn't help it. I thought about it, and then I should have stopped. I couldn't. Here's another quote. But all researchers, I love this one, all researchers agree on certain facts. These are facts. You can't deny these. We know, for example, that humans evolved from ancestors we share with other living primates, such as chimpanzees and apes. You can't question that. Only a religious zealot who's denying the obvious would question such a thing. That's kind of what's being implied here. So according to the evolutionary theory, apes and humans all have a common ancestor, and we're evolving onward, upward, and better, and we're becoming more evolved over time, and someday we'll become so advanced we'll make spaceships and we'll fly around the universe and discover planets and other races, and it'll all be great. We'll be like God. We'll become as gods. It's kind of the same idea that the snake spoke to Eve in the Garden of Eden. Not a lot has changed, by the way. So, what is the actual evidence for this? Well, before we jump into what's presented today, let's look at the track record thus far for some of this stuff. And the way you get an ape-man, you get an ape-man 3 different ways. The first thing you do is you can upscale an ape fossil. You can find a fossil that's pretty clearly ape, and then try to give it some human characteristics. Therefore, make your ape-man that way. Or you can find a human fossil and try to downscale it, make it a little bit more apish in your interpretation, therefore making an ape-man. Or you could find a true ape-man. And this is where you take both human fossils and ape fossils and put them together and make a real ape-man. We'll see examples of all of these. And you get most all of these from partial fossils. Because you see, when you find a whole fossil, a whole skeleton, you know what it is. You find a whole human skeleton, you know it's human. A whole ape skeleton, you know it's ape. But when you find a partial, where you have some wiggle room and you can interpret things, this is where you can create your ape-man. So, what is the track record thus far? And some of these you might have heard before. I know Gary touches on some of these, but I just like going over them for fun anyway. Let's talk about, first of all, Piltdown Man. Who's heard about Piltdown Man? Anybody? All right, yeah, some of you. Good. Discovered in 1912, and I love this article in the New York Times, Darwin theory proved true. How? The Piltdown Man. They discovered Piltdown Man. Was used in the Scopes monkey trial in 1925 as evidence for evolution. So what was Piltdown Man? Well, there he is. They found a segment of a human skull, and they found a segment of an ape-like jaw. Put them together, they thought they found an ape-man. These parts were discovered between 1908 and 1912 in Piltdown, England. Was featured in textbooks for 40 years as proof for evolution. I want you to take that in for a second. In other words, for 40 years, kids went through school looking at these pictures of ape-men based on these fossils, being taught the idea that they evolved from an ape-like ancestor, that evolution was true, and i.e. the Bible is not. What was Piltdown man? Oh, by the way, he's claimed to be a 500,000-year intermediate link, somewhere around that age. Piltdown man actually turned out to be a fraud. One of the biggest hoaxes ever in science. The bones are actually just 600 years old. This actually was a chimp's jawbone, and they filed down the teeth. They filed them down to make them a little bit flatter, more like humans, and then they stained the skull cap and the jaw to match, to give them the appearance of age. Basically, it deceived people for 40 years, deceived scientists for 40 years as proof for evolution, now known as the greatest hoax in science. Or what about Nebraska man? Who's heard about Nebraska man? I like Nebraska man. I love the fact that, look at this picture. Take this picture in for a second. If you look at this picture, here's Nebraska man right there. Very detailed, and there's his wife. So obviously they found a whole lot of good stuff, right? Nebraska man was discovered in 1922, claimed to be a 1 million year old intermediate link, and was also used in the Scopes monkey trial. So what did they find to get these pictures? Well, let me tell you what they didn't have. They did not find a whole skeleton, which you might think from the picture. They didn't even find a whole skull. They did not even find a whole jaw. You know what they found? Scientifically built from a single tooth. It was one tooth, a whole tooth, and nothing but the tooth. You can't handle the tooth. I'm getting them all out at one time. Okay, I got that out of my system. I'm good. Yeah, they found one tooth. I mean, you've got to be really good to take one tooth and get that. And then to draw his wife on top of that is really impressive. I think Sherlock Holmes will be impressed with that. And actually, that one tooth turned out to belong to what? A pig. Yeah, turned out to belong to a pig. So here is the real Nebraska man right there. There he is in all his glory. Or what about this fellow, Mr. Ramapithecus? They found this jawbone in the 1930s. That's what they found. This is what they drew. From a jawbone, some type of ape-like creature almost on its way up, evolving, wanting to stand upright. You get that idea from it. And from Time magazine, they say Ramapithecus is ideally structured to be an ancestor of all hominids, which is like an ape-man leading up to humankind. If he isn't, we don't have anything else that is, so he must be true. Ramapithecus was suggested to be a 14 million year old intermediate link. The truth? Well, we found a baboon in 1970 in Ethiopia, had the same dental structure, same morphology, and then Ramapithecus was quietly swept under the rug, which is kind of what usually happens with these guys. And there's a new one to take its place. We'll see him later on. So thus far, let's look at this. A summary of the quote-unquote facts. Piltdown man's a hoax, Nebraska man a pig, Ramapithecus an ape. And what about the dates given for each one? They were all way off by at least 500,000 years. Let's do a few more just for fun. I like doing this. What about Boxgrove man? They drew this picture right here. Again, they're drawing either his friend or his wife. I'm not really sure who that is. Can't really tell. Boxgrove man, what did they find? A shin bone. Just one. That's it. Or, what about this guy? This guy's one of my favorites. Ardipithecus ramidus cadabra. I literally have to go home and practice these names. All right, these names are ridiculous. But anyway, it featured in Time magazine, How Apes Became Human. One giant step for mankind. And he's described to be like a 6 million year old intermediate link. Well, what did they find? Well, these were the fossils they found, right there. And, that proves it's an intermediate link. Can't you tell? That's it. And its hominid status, its ape-man status, was based on a single toe bone. They said, well, that toe bone looks human and the rest looks ape-like. Therefore, this must be an ape-man. This toe bone right there. Not to mention the fact this toe bone was found 11 miles away in a different layer of dirt. For that matter, all these fossils were spread out over an area of 9 miles, which does beg the question, was this the first suicide bomber? I'm just throwing that out there. And maybe it was a nuclear bomb because it was a 9-mile spread. And it's something to think about. Or you got Peking man. Peking man was used after Piltdown man. Some scientists were still a little sensitive after that hoax, but they turned to Peking man. They found pieces of a skull in a cave in China. All the evidence was lost during World War II, though, conveniently lost. What no one was ever told until after a long time was they found 10 human fossils in these same places, these monkey bones. And then all the evidence was gone, and you could never disprove it. Kind of convenient. Or Java Man. All of these, by the way, spent time, years in textbooks as proof for evolution. Java Man, found by Dr. Du Bois. He found an ape skull cap, 3 human teeth, and a human thigh bone. And he informed the world he had found the missing link. Java Man also used in the Scopes monkey trial. Seeing a theme here, right? And then later on, we found out that, oh no, Dr. Du Bois hid the fact he found 2 normal human skulls in the same layer. Hid that for 30 years. And we could go on and on. We really could. I don't want to kill you guys with all of these. But Ape-Men have been deduced from bones which belong to alligators, horses, bears, elephants, donkeys, and dolphins. I don't know how you get an Ape-Man from a dolphin, but somebody did it. All right. The question is why? Why are they stretching so many of these fossils? And the answer is pretty simple. There's just not a whole lot of fossils to work with. I don't know if you remember from way back, I think, week 6 when we talked about fossils. But less than 1% of fossils in the world are vertebrate fossils. And most of those fossils are fish. And 95% of the land fossils we actually find are 1 bone or less. There is just not a whole lot to work with. So when anybody finds anything, they're quick to make it something important because you just don't find that many. And then, of course, as this secular scientist tells us, it's very true, everyone knows that fossils are fickle. Bones will sing any song you want to hear. I'll give you an example. If you look at this little section of a fossil right there, this little piece of jawbone, just some molar teeth. Now, if you take this particular jawbone, put it in a more rounded shaped jaw, and give it some smaller canines, the pointed teeth, bring those down a little bit, because this is a piece of an ape jaw. But give it some smaller canines, more human-like, then you've just created a hominid. And now you've got a missing link, and now people are looking at your research like, man, this guy's good. He's got something going on. Let's fund him. I'm not saying scientists are evil, but it's just practical. You need to make funds for people to fund what you are doing. It's just that simple. And so now you've got a hominid. Or if you interpret it like this, where, okay, you put it in a normal ape jaw with your sharp canines like apes have, now you just got nothing but an ape. Who wants that? You get nothing for that, no acclaim, no glory, you're not finding anything new. And you can take any fossil like that and give it, once you put flesh on it, hair on it, whatever, make it look very, very different. You can take this ape skull, make it look very human-like or ape-like. Here's the skull of a Neanderthal. You can take it, and depending on what kind of flesh you put on it, what angle you set the head. You see, humans, our skull sits directly on top of our spine because we stand upright. And so we can do all the stuff we do. We have balance, we can run, skip, dance. Well, some of us can dance, but you guys get the point, okay? And so, but apes, their skull sits on their spine a little different, kind of like this. So when they're walking on all fours, this is comfortable. Their chin's up. They're perfectly designed to do what they do. So depending on how you put the skull on the neck, notice it's slanted here, can make it more ape-like or more human-like. And again, you can interpret it so many different ways, and they've done this multiple ways here. And basically in this article, the artist is like, how do you want me to make them? You want them more ape-like? You want them more human-like? You tell me. Make them any way you want. And this, I like how Nigel Loggs put it, few scientists produce such abundant returns from so few fragments as paleontology. I like this one. Dr. Tim White from Berkeley. By the way, Berkeley's not a Christian institution, in case you guys were wondering. 5 million-year-old piece of bone that was thought to be the collarbone of a human-like creature is actually part of a dolphin rib. The problem with a lot of anthropologists, remember this is a secular scientist speaking, is that they want so much to find a hominid, an ape-man, that any scrap of bone becomes a hominid bone. That's why you see so many of these things. That's why you see so many of these frauds portrayed and then put in textbooks and then taken out. So what's presented today? What are in our textbooks today as evidence for this idea of evolution? Now, we can't go through every single one. There's just too many. And there's always a new one popping up. You ever notice that? About every few years, hey, we found the missing link. You didn't know it was missing? Yeah, it's still missing. Now we found it. And a few years later, hey, we found the missing link again. It's amazing. And so they keep popping up. There's a whole bunch of them. But I want to give you kind of the general outline. So according to evolutionary theory, there's some hominid ancestor about 30 to 50 million years ago. This is the ancestor from which all apes come. We don't know who he is or what he is, but he's out there somewhere. We've got about one guess. I'll show you that here in a second, according to the evolutionists. And then you have Ramapithecus, a different Ramapithecus popping on the scene about 14 million years ago. Then you've got probably the most famous of intermediates presented by scientists, Australopithecines, Afarensis, Africanus. Anybody ever heard of Lucy? That's where Lucy fits. We'll talk about her a lot later. And then Homo erectus, which is supposed to be kind of like that first step in the real Homo sapien direction. And some scientists even put him in the category of Homo sapien, which is human. And then you get to Homo sapiens, which would be your Neanderthals, now classified as Homo sapiens. We'll talk about that later. Cro-Magnon man, modern man, and so forth. And actually, technically, do you realize that now we, modern men, we are no longer Homo sapien? We are a Homo sapien sapien. Now, don't say it out loud, but does anyone know what the word sapien means? My wife does. Hey. I'll tell y'all later. You'll love it. It's great stuff. We'll get to it later on. So let's kind of go through some of these and see what science presents and what the actual evidence is. The hominid. Now, Homo died 30 million years ago. The best guess they have right now is this creature called the Eosimius. There he is right there. Kind of like a lemur, very much like a tree monkey. And they think this guy may be the hominid that we need because they found these two bones right there. Two bones the size of rice. And I love this little quote. From these two bones, it's amazing. They can deduce that Eosimius was shy, nocturnal, and had large saucer-like eyes and flittered about the treetops. That's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. But that's all they got. Now, they thought they found a replacement a couple years ago. You guys hear about Ida? Anybody remember Ida? No, we'll talk about Ida later on. So that's all they got for Eosimius. They're still looking. You can see why. Then you've got Ramapithecus. Can't find an ancestor, but what about Ramapithecus? Well, originally, this is what we found. A couple pieces of jawbone. You can probably see a trend here. And from this, they made this. Now, I like the white beard. That's a nice touch. And notice the whites of the eye. That's important. I hope you notice that a couple different places. You'll see that a lot. So we found the jawbone, and then as we keep searching, we find more bones belonging to Ramapithecus. We find a skull, pretty much a whole skull. There's a skull of a chimp. There's the skull of an orangutan. And what does this look like? Looks like an orangutan. Got the sloped face, up lip right here in the jaw, the teeth. Looks very much like an orangutan. We find more fossils. Lo and behold, he's just an orangutan. That's it. And evidently these guys think it's hilarious that we think we're related to them. But no, Ramapithecus is just an orangutan, still around today. So far, not doing so well. And supposedly millions of years of evolution taking place right here with no real tangible evidence. That's supposed to be about 15 to 20 million years that we got nothing for. And then that leads us up to Australopithecines. Australopithecine just means southern ape. That's all it means. It sounds really fancy, but pretty simple. And there are all kind of different Australopithecines. This is an Australopithecus africanus. Here's the picture drawn. What do you notice about the picture? Upright. The what? Yeah, got the tools. What about what's holding the tools? Look at those hands. And he's got better hands than I do. All right, he's got some really good hands. Notice, I love how he's kind of staring into the distance, like he's really thinking hard about something. This is, of course, what you would see in your textbooks. Yeah. Here is the fossil for Lucy. Now, she's author Australopithecines afarensis, I believe. And that's all they found right there. I want you to do something for me, because this always kind of blows me away. I don't know about you guys. But this set of fossils right here is supposedly the absolute best evidence that all humans evolved from an ape, that those apes come from worms, that come from a single-celled organism, that came from a rock, that came from nothing billions of years ago. This is the best evidence you got for that. Does that not kind of overwhelm anybody else? Thinking, really? You're buying all of that from this? But there's Lucy. There she is. She was found by Dr. Donald Johanson, 1974. And they named her Lucy because they were listening to the song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds when they found her. So it's kind of a fitting name. And they found about 40% of the fossil. And the reason 40% is in quotation marks is because they actually didn't even find that much. But you hardly ever find hand bones or foot bones. So scientists don't even count those in the equation anymore. They actually found about 25, 30% of the fossil. But they claimed that she was a 3.5 million year old intermediate link and that she walked bipedal, upright. And so from this, they got that. And then if you take a closer look, this is from the St. Louis Museum. Look at the picture. Look at the, not a picture, it's actually a 3D model, or a model. Look at the feet. Look like normal feet. Well, maybe with a little extra hair. I hope none of your feet look like that. I mean, but no, you notice the toes. This is really kind of a big deal. Remember, they found no feet or hand bones, not a single one. Why did they give her such human feet? Well, there's a couple of reasons for that, but we'll get to at least one of them today. But here they are in the textbook, again, human feet for Lucy, just like in the St. Louis Museum. And one of the reasons they made her have human feet is because apes' feet are really different from ours. And scientists have a super hard time trying to figure out how that changed to that. Because they're so different, and their function is completely different. Apes have this nice wide, or kind of like another thumb used for grabbing, holding on the trees upside down. I would not suggest you try to hang upside down by your feet. It's probably going to end badly, okay? But apes can do it really well. But of course, our feet are made to do all kinds of neat stuff. Walking, running, skipping, dancing, gymnastics. We can do all kinds of amazing things because of the way we are built. We both do what we're designed to do, and that's what you would expect, given a creator. But as we found more fossils of the supposed Australopithecines, we started to realize that, hey, these Australopithecines, they have long, curved fingers. They have locking wrists, knuckle walkers, all right? They have the wrong talus angle on their ankles. They walk like apes, and they have an ape-like foot. This guy, Dr. Charles Oxnard, is the absolute foremost expert on these guys. And he says Lucy has a big toe that sticks out like chimpanzees. She does not have an ape-like foot. Then why is this still at the St. Louis Museum? This professor says it's a complete misrepresentation, and they know it is. Why? Well, here's what they say. Zoo officials have no plans to knuckle under. Yeah, I know. That's not mine, by the way. Okay, so that's good. That's them. We cannot be updating every exhibit based on every new piece of evidence. We look at the overall exhibit and the impression it creates. And we think the overall impression that this exhibit creates is correct. That's what you call public education and indoctrination. And by the way, it's not just in the textbooks. It's not just in schools. You gone to a museum lately? You gone to the aquarium? Go to the zoo? Public broadcast television? Everywhere. Everywhere. We're going to spend just a tad bit more time on Lucy just because I want to really debunk her because she's science's favorite. So I'm going to kind of go through some of the details, not every detail like I used to, but a lot of them. First of all, look at Lucy's knee. Johansson said that the knee, the femur, was angled, proving that Lucy was becoming human. Because humans, apes tend to have a very straight up and down connection between their knee bone and their thigh bone, where humans have an angle designed to do what we do. And so he says, well, Lucy's is angled like humans. She's kind of in between. Thing is, got a couple of problems. Number one, Lucy's knee is actually not Lucy's knee. It was found a year earlier, 70 meters away in a different layer of dirt, or over a mile away in a different meter of dirt. Not only that, but even if it is Lucy's knee, it doesn't prove she was human. There are monkeys today, tree-dwelling monkeys, that have angled knees. Orangutans, spotted monkeys, so it doesn't mean anything. Also, Lucy's pelvis. Chimps have pelvis that are angled like this because they're meant to walk on all fours. Our pelvis is angled very differently because we walk upright, which is what we're meant to do. And Lucy's pelvis looks like that of a chimp, and this is what this expert is saying. I'm not going to spend too long reading the quote. But I do want to show you this video. Lucy's pelvis is like a chimp's. That's a problem. So they're trying to fix, in this video, this is from Nova, and this is actually another creationist speaker talking about it, so he's going to talk about the video as it goes. But he's showing a clip from Nova where they're trying to fix Lucy's pelvis to make it so she walks upright. And I want you to watch what they do to try to make her human. It's absolutely amazing.
Nova, have you heard Nova? There was a PBS Nova series in which Dr. Owen Lovejoy, a very distinguished, famous paleoanthropologist, was involved. And he's looking at Lucy's skeleton here, and he's lamenting the fact that the hips are all wrong. They're supposed to be human-like hips, so you can walk the way the Latoli footprints showed she walked, but they don't look like human hips, they look like ape hips. What to do about this? Watch it. You'll get a big kick out of this.
The ape that stood up, it was a revolutionary idea. We needed Owen Lovejoy's expertise again, because the evidence wasn't quite adding up. The knee looked human, but the shape of her hip didn't. Superficially, her hip resembled a chimpanzee's, which meant that Lucy couldn't possibly have walked like a modern human. But Lovejoy noticed something odd about the way the bones had been fossilized.
When I put the two parts of the pelvis together that we had, this part of the pelvis has pressed so hard and so completely into this one that it caused it to be broken into a series of individual pieces which were then fused together in later fossils.
So you see they were broken and they don't fit together properly. They did speculate in the program as to exactly who was responsible for breaking the hip, and current scientific evidence suggests perhaps a deer stepped on it. Here you can see a deer foot stepping on the bone. Isn't that a bummer? Let's see where it goes from here.
This has caused the two bones, in fact, to fit together so well that they're in an anatomically impossible position.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bones seem to flare out like a chimp's. But all was not lost.
This is a power saw, friend. You may want to put your goggles on.
Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster.
Notice he's removing whole parts, not just cutting.
He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle.
Look how perfect. You can read a newspaper through the hole.
As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
Yeah, now, this is what we call science. You can teach this in the public schools, but you can't criticize it, because if you do, that would be religious. So,
it's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, so it doesn't fit. Let's work on it a little bit. And now, hey, she's standing upright. As we find more and more fossils of the Australopithecines, more and more secular scientists are admitting, yeah, absolutely, she did not walk upright. She's a knuckle walker. These are secular scientists saying she definitely was like this guy. I walked over to the cabinet, pulled out Lucy, and shazam! She had the morphology of a knuckle walker. She was an ape. That's why. Her skull, ape-like. Ear canal, like an ape. They have a special ear canal, different from ours. Skull, like an ape. These secular scientists say, yep, her skull is like that of an ape. Not human. Same thing this guy says right here. But in our textbooks, here's the actual skull. Here's a picture drawn in one of the textbooks I was looking at. I want you to notice the subtle changes they made to the skull to make it look more human. First, the tooth. They filed down this tooth to make it flatter, more like a human, taking away the sharp edge of the canine tooth. Then, they brought the eye socket in a little bit, making it not as extreme as chimps or apes tend to be. And they also gave her a little bit of a nose, because apes can't wear glasses. They don't have this little thing right here. Okay? But they gave her a little one of those to make her appear more human-like. Just that subtle indoctrination, if you will. And then, of course, you get things like this. Here is a skull of an Australopithecine. Here's the picture the artist drew. And I want you to notice very clearly, of course, the human features, the look on the face, but even more than anything, what sticks out more than anything? The whites of the eyes. Do you realize that's unique to humans? And by giving her the whites of the eyes, it gives her the impression of humanity. That's actually what he says. He says, I wanted to get a human soul into this ape-like face to indicate where she was headed. Where was she headed? I said that one time when somebody yelled out Walmart. Yeah. Or someone else said, well, she was headed to higher ground. Floodwaters, yeah, either way. Yeah. And so just... We used to talk about all this, we don't have time, but if you look at Lucy, skull like a chimp, brain size of a chimp, ear canal like a chimp, long arms, legs like a chimp, pelvis like a chimp, you guys getting the idea? Shoulders and back muscles like a chimp, hands like a chimp, feet and hands were long and curved like a chimp, yet still presented as some of the best evidence that we evolved from ape-like ancestors. And this guy says, knowing all of this, it's kind of questionable why they still have it in the textbooks as proof for this idea of human evolution. And then we go from Lucy. Again, so far we're not doing so well. She's just an ape, probably an extinct type of ape. If you want more on her, I know it's a lot, you can check out that video we just saw a clip of. You can go to Answers in Genesis, video on demand, and Lucy's She's No Lady, Dr. David Minton. It's really, really good. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, you can go check that out. Then after Lucy, you need some type of intermediate on the way up to Homo erectus, so they think maybe Homo habilis, also called handyman. And I like this quote from the American Journal. It says, if there wasn't a Homo habilis, we'd have to make one up, because we need something right there. And as it turns out, Homo habilis is invalid, a mix of ape and human fossils, as is kind of the trend. Then that leads us to Homo erectus. And this is where you start getting to the humans. Here is a picture of Homo erectus. And I like this, How Man Began from Time magazine. I don't know why Time magazine has such a vested interest in promoting evolution, but there are a lot of good covers. And Homo erectus is presented in the textbook as, kind of like one of the first Homo sapiens, or leading right up to the first Homo sapiens. But if you look at Homo erectus, there's the skeleton, completely human. Has some distinct features, just like all of us have distinct features, especially among different people groups when you separate the gene pool, like after the Tower of Babel, but completely human. The skull size of Homo erectus fits within the normal genetic variation of humans, around 1,000 cubic centimeters. So Homo erectus is just 100% human. And that leads us to the Homo sapiens, our direct ancestors according to the theory of evolution, which is Neanderthal man, Cro-Magnon man, a few others too. We're just going to talk about Neanderthals real quick because they're just so popular. Neanderthals, that's what the Geico caveman's supposed to be, in case you didn't know. It's supposed to be a Neanderthal. And it's kind of interesting, it's kind of ironic, I think, that the way they present Neanderthal in the commercials, intelligent, smart, it's probably more like what they really were like, which is kind of intriguing to me. But they were first found in Germany in 1856, constructed to look ape-like, even though their brain capacity is bigger than ours. They had bigger brains, which is usually a big deal. First pictures of Neanderthals looked something like this, basically a big old gorilla standing upright. And as we find more fossils and correctly interpret them, we say, no, they look more kind of like this, brutish, more like a man, but still very much an ape man, because they're rearranging the data. An example of this would be here. Dr. Jack Kuzo, who has a great book called Buried Alive about the Neanderthals. You should check it out. He actually got to go and study a lot of the skulls in person, the real thing, which is a rare opportunity. He's a dentist, got to study them, really neat. He looked at them and he noticed quite a few things. First of all, he got this drawing of Neanderthal from the museum in Berlin. And he noticed, he's a dentist, he knows these things, that they took the jawbone and they moved it up over an inch out of place to give it the idea of a protruding jaw, to make the Neanderthal look more ape-like. When you put the jaw in its right spot, usually very much a flat face, like humans. Again, they're just kind of rearranging the data to make it fit their preconceived ideas. The actual Neanderthal anatomy, well, he definitely did, on average, have a thick eyebrow ridge. There's no doubt about that. Neanderthals tend to be stocky builds. Their skeletons are completely human, but very thick, probably because they lived in harsh weather, probably right after the flood during the Ice Age. And they were probably really, really strong, and they had short arms and short legs overall. Dr. Kuzo points this out, though, that as you look at the Neanderthal skulls, and you look at the eyebrow ridge, he tells us that, do you realize that your eyebrow ridge never stops growing? That because of the way you chew, the way the muscles are attached, the way they pull on the brow ridge, it always grows. And tribal peoples like the Aborigines, who are always using their teeth like a vice, using their mouth like a vice to hold stuff and pull, these grow more, which is why you tend to see bigger eyebrow ridges on them. And he says, what you're seeing here with these particular skulls, what looks like someone who's around 200 years old, and their eyebrow ridge just kept growing. Well, isn't it interesting? Don't you remember after the flood, people lived to be around 400 years old for a while? Then they lived to be around 200 years old. So these skulls are probably nothing more than people who were living a long time during a very harsh environment after the flood. Probably an isolated group of people just like the other people after the Tower of Babel. And by the way, look at the variation today. The Aborigines have big eyebrow ridges. Here's a European skull. You get flat-headed Indians. You get tons of variation. If you think about it right now, if you killed every one of us, buried us, and dug us up, and just looked at our skulls and the size of our skeletons, you could probably make a good argument for evolution. There's a lot of variation just in this room. So you look at Neanderthals, there's his whole frame, completely human. And as we study Neanderthals more and more, we realize they are human. This is the latest model of Neanderthals. Actually, not the latest, one of the latest. Completely human. We know that they used jewelry, musical instruments, had complex tools, did cave drawings, they could talk really good like us, and they buried their dead. Sounds pretty human, doesn't it? And actually, a lot of scientists now are conceding the fact that, yeah, it looks like Neanderthals mated with other humans, cross-species, interbreeding, as they call it, but they're just all human. Makes perfect sense. And we know, for example, in multiple sites where Neanderthals and modern-day looking humans were buried together. But here's something to think about. Evolution suggests that Neanderthals were around for around 100,000 years. 100,000 years. Think about this. In just 2,000 years, in 100 generations, the population of the Earth has gone from 300 million to 6 billion in just 100 generations. Now, if Neanderthals were around for 2,500 generations, we should be finding a whole lot of Neanderthal skeletons everywhere. We can't find hardly any. We find about 4,000, a few thousand total human skeletons. That's it. That is all. Great evidence that they weren't around that long, and they're completely human after the flood. And as we learn more and more, this is interesting, we compare their DNA to ours. And their DNA will differ, their mitochondrial DNA will differ by up to 22 different replacement substitutions within the DNA code between the Neanderthal and human. Well, all of us, we differ by 1 to 24 substitutions in our DNA code. So they're close. Actually, Neanderthals are closer to me than some of you are. But they're considered not human? What does this mean? Well, if there are some humans that are 2% more different than Neanderthals are from other humans, then that technically means that 8% of the people in this room tonight are not human. You can kind of look around and figure out who they are. I'm just, maybe nudge somebody beside you, I don't know. That's crazy, right? And as we look at the DNA, we realize they are absolutely human, 100%. And that's what most scientists are coming to now. And we see human variation today. The Watusi, the Pygmies, basketball players, Inuits, different sizes, shapes, all kinds of things, all because of genetic variation, the amazing amount of genetic information in our code, natural selection, Tower of Babel, all that stuff we've already talked about. So conclusion about Neanderthals, they do have the big eyebrow ridge, that's true. They did have that stocky build. They're an isolated people group, have certain characteristics that are redundant just like other isolated people groups. Probably lived in a very cold, harsh environment, ice age after the flood, 100% human. Matter of fact, the leading expert on Neanderthals says this is what he thinks they look like. You give that guy a shave, put a suit on him, single ladies. Derek would come in and do that, wouldn't he? All right. And here are some of the more recent pictures. This is how they portray Neanderthals. They look more and more human the more and more we study them, because they are. Two other quick ones. I know we're running a little short on time, but two of the more recent ones. This happened in 2009. I don't know, anybody remember Ida, the commotion? Okay, well, they found Ida. They named her Darwinius Massali. They nicknamed her Ida. They named her Darwinius after Darwin. They said, this is it. We found the missing link. They had a website, a book, a documentary, all lined up to be unveiled with her, and they did, selling her as a missing link. And they described her as being the eighth wonder of the world, the Holy Grail, the Rosetta Stone. We have found the missing link. The missing link is no longer missing. We'll say they never admit that until they find the missing link. All right, and then they admit it. And then, come to find out, yeah, she has nothing whatsoever to do with the evolution of primates. And so they come up with a bunch of hoopla, say, hey, here's your missing link, here's your missing link. And then they figure, not so much. And so what do? Lift up the rug very quietly, sweep her under the rug, set it down quietly. Don't tell anybody, just let everybody assume it's still true, and move on about your business. You see this happen over and over again. That's why I can't go through all of them, because there's so many. And that leads us up to this girl right here. The last one we'll talk about tonight, Artipithecus ramidus, also known as Ardi. Now, with Ardi, there's a nice picture. Where did they get the picture from? Well, here's what they found. There are the fossils, right there. And I love this quote. Let's look at this quote. On discovery, Ardi was found in a very fragmented condition. Badly broken elements such as the untrained eye sees here were interpreted by professional paleontologists. Don't try this at home. And with the aid of specialized computer software, by the way, software that assumes evolution is true, they formed a scientific opinion about Ardi's skeleton and bodily form. So from this, you get that, and then that, and then that. I'm going to give you just a quick 45-second fast forward through a Discovery Channel special on the formation of Ardi and kind of talk you through it. So here you go. They're showing you some apes first. I was going to play Walk This Way by Aerosmith, but I didn't think it was appropriate in church. All right? So here are the fossils. They're putting them together. How's her pelvis? Well, maybe she walked upright. Yeah, she had to. She has to be an ape man or ape woman. So we put it in the computer, the specialized program. There's already walking upright. Okay, let's make her whole skeleton. There it is. Flesh it out. Make the whole structure, put the muscles on it, put the flesh on it. There's Ardi. But we're not done yet. Oh no. We take a human, put motion sensors on the human, have the human walk around, climb a tree, record the motion, then attach this newly computer-generated Ardi to the motion. So she walks like a human, climbs like a human, and all your kids can go home, watch Discovery Channel, watch this documentary, and see that evolution is true and the Bible's wrong. Absolutely amazing. And as we look at Ardi more and more, just like everybody else, she's fairly new, but this scientist says, yeah, her feet are like an ape's feet. She's got a really big divergent big toe, which is an ape thing. I don't think she could walk upright, and if you look at her big toe, indeed, it's really ape-like, not like a human at all, used for grasping stuff. And as they look at her more and more, they'll figure out, yeah, she's an ape, and she'll probably be swept under the little rug like anybody else, like all the other missing links. And so again, you see the way you get an ape man, upscale the ape fossils, downscale the human fossils, or combine ape and human fossils. And I showed that again on purpose because I want you to realize that the next time you see on the news, on Discovery Channel, that they found the missing link, just remember this. It's probably one of these three options, more than likely. And as this secular scientist says, fossil evidence of human evolution history is fragmentary and open to various interpretations. He is absolutely right. And when we find whole skeletons, we know apes are apes and humans are humans, just like the Bible says. And to summarize the status of human evolution today, according to secular scientists, I'm going to quote three very famous secular scientists. This one says, first, Darwinian evolution is impossible to observe. We can't see it today. Why? Because it happens too slowly, so we can't observe it. So technically it's not science, but anyway. Next, mutations and selection is effectively dead, according to Stephen Gould. Why? Because mutations and natural selection don't add genetic information, as we talked about before. They take away or they mix. They don't add any new genetic information. Doesn't make macroevolution happen. And last, we have not a single watertight transitional fossil. Not a one. And we saw that here tonight. I think the Bible gets it right when it tells us that I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works. Psalmist gets it right. And I'm going to close with this. I told you I'd tell you guys what it means. If you look, here's the outline. You go to the end. Here we are, Homo sapiens sapiens. The word sapien means wise. So we are the wise man. The wise man. And I wonder if any of you are thinking of the verse I thought of when that really hit home with me. It made me go back to Romans 1:21 through 23, where it says, for although they knew God, they neither glorified him nor gave thanks to him, but in their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. And professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal men and birds and animals and reptiles. Does that not just summarize what we looked at? If you got any ideas, any questions, anything you want to talk about, hey, just come on up. Be glad to talk as long as you like, but let's close in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, God, we thank you for this night. We thank you for your time. Thank you for time to come together to study your word. Thank you, Lord, that your word is true, and we can trust it with every area of our life. God, I pray that we would trust you with everything we have, our entire being, everything we are, that you would use us to glorify your name, and Lord, just draw us close to you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.